Alright, Diablo players, so let's talk about it. Why is your build not doing the exact same pit tier that you see other content creators, or you're checking the websites to see what's the best build in the entire game? And I really want this video to kind of serve as two purposes. Kind of give you guys the rundown of rank 1 pushing, and then on top of that also give you guys a different mindset. Don't worry too much about the highest pit tier clear in order to determine which build is going to be the most fun and enjoyable. I promise you, these people that are doing these pit tiers, it is an absolute rough grind, and it also is usually involving some sort of bugs to get to the highest ranks. This is something very common throughout the entire history of Diablo. It's not even this season in particular, but this has been a common thing in Diablo where, like, to do a pit 150, you usually have to do some sort of bugs. I've covered builds that were able to do it, but sometimes they do get removed from the leaderboards. But just keep in mind that the game isn't really orienting you around doing eventually a pit 150. The game is probably designed us to kind of hit about pit 100 with 1 or 2 builds, and the rest of the builds simply cannot do it. It's almost a problem in the game itself, but I really wanted to go ahead and go over the things that is kind of required here. And it actually comes down to having such incredibly godly gear. A lot of these build guides, it doesn't matter what website you're using, their gear is triple masterworked, and it's got multiple greater affixes. Again, it doesn't matter what website you're using. The gear that some of these streamers and rank 1 pushes have such godly gear that it is very unrealistic for you to copy the build and have the same exact gear. But that's really what it comes down to. And then also the last tip is going to be the most important to realize, that it is actually not that important. So let's go ahead and start off with a couple things here. So first off, we'll answer the question, why is your build not doing the same pit tier? Because you see the content creator show the build and say that, you know, you don't really need this, but honestly, sometimes you actually do. It's like when people say in Path of Exile, oh, you really don't need a headhunter, but like, if you want the same results, you have to have the exact same piece of gear. Now with Diablo, it really comes down to certain builds just not being as good as others, and I want to stress this, you do not have to go do the highest tier in the pit. Don't feel like you have to hit pit 131 in order to have fun. A lot of these best builds are so clunky to actually play because they have to have so many different things active at one point. But the rundown is that you need to have a lot of these things checked. It will actually make you feel a lot more frustrated to actually run some of these builds. For some players, it depends on the playstyle. A lot of them require you to go on your keyboard and literally spam like this, and it absolutely is annoying when majority of players do want to go ahead and have a little bit more fun. But if you have to push all of these keys in order for your DPS to come online, again, your average player is going to feel kind of frustrated with it. So I'm stressing you guys why I don't think it's good to actually follow rank 1 builds all the time. It's a lot of times better to follow a somewhat similar guide for the same build, but not as much as of a piano playstyle for most of the players. That's why I'm saying for most of you guys, you aren't going to have as much fun with the game doing this. You're going to have a lot more fun basically experimenting and trying out other builds and just stay lower in the pit tiers. While most builds can comfortably do T4, again, in pushing 100, there's very few builds that are going to be able to do it in the current state of Diablo, which hopefully will be fixed in the future. But the main thing that I want you guys to do when you are looking at any build website is you have to have the same gear. Now, it's kind of an issue specifically with the Mythics being so incredibly powerful because you get so much cooldown reduction with, let's say, the Harlequin Crest. There is not really a replacement. I know some people have the mindset of, well, it has a Mythic, but I'll just run a helmet that has cooldown reduction. You realistically cannot do this. You have to copy exactly. Not only do you need the Mythic, but the GA specifically on Harlequin is the biggest offender here, or the triple masterworking on the very specific stat that they tell you that you need to get it. It's for a certain like number, and a lot of times when people are copying builds, they do not copy specifically the greater affixes and the masterworking. So if you get that, that will significantly help you out. Also, pay attention to the aspects in this game, as there's a lot of newer players here and they're like, well, I don't have his aspect, but this one is like similar, but no, it's not. You have to copy the exact aspects, and also the location does matter for the game. If you put something on a two-hander, it's going to give you double the stats as a one-hander. So make sure that you actually put the correct aspect in the exact same spot. It's a very common thing. Or sometimes what does happen is you get an upgrade and you forget to go ahead and replace your aspects, because the rolls can be, let's say, like 20x to 30x, and when you multiply these on a two-hander, again, it starts to add up quite a bit. I have a dedicated video that goes over how to like min-max some of your stats a little bit more. I'll also link that for you guys here. But you absolutely need to have the max stats on the gear. That is going to be specifically where it says item power. There is a very specific number, and that ties into how high the item can actually roll for those said stats, because if it's not going to be 800 item power, it is non-ancestral, meaning the rolls on it, even if you get the perfect roll, because it's not an ancestral, even if it reads the perfect roll, it's actually still a low roll. Because if you get higher item power, the stats raises by quite a bit. This is especially true with specifically on the amulet. Getting that percentage to dexterity, int, or any of the main stat is absolutely key to have that greater affix on that. And it's usually the amulet that is the biggest offender when it comes to min-maxing and really pushing your build to its limits. Getting a lot of these things where it says plus ranks to apex or potent, these are a lot of times 8 to 10x multiplicative damage, and when you can get 70x plus, let's say, 40x, I'm just going to use easy math here, because some of them, they are conditional, they require ramp ups, they require like a poison target, a chilled target, whatever. But those two alone could be 100x your damage, which is very, very massive, especially if you get the correct masterworking and double greater affixes, or even triple with the main stat. That is going to take your build really to the next level. But on top of that, a lot of times people have multiple greater affixes on their mythics. I want to shout out Makuna over here, because he was a grinder in the previous season when it came to farming the mythics and crafting so many rings of the Starless Skies to get that exact one that he wanted. There are a lot of top tier players, guys, and these players will grind the game, and they have so much resources. They're going to craft again and again until they get that multiple GA mythic or the correct one that they actually want. That is the big difference here. Getting a mythic for a lot of people is already seen as like, that's like super hard to get. But then to get not only the correct greater affix on it, to get multiple is just an absolute nightmare. And a lot of times, if you look at their gear in game, they have a lot of these things multiple greater affix. There's specifically on like the rogue, if you play like the death trap, you need like to hit 2 different GAs, and then you have to have perfect masterworking. Again, all of this will tie in here, the perfect masterworking, and a lot of it comes down to specifically your skill. This is a big offender if you are playing this current season with, let's say, the Hydra Sorc. That is a big area of big damage, because the differences between doing certain amount of damage multipliers is getting like 2 or 3 extra Hydra heads, which could equivalent to 100x per head, which is like 300x damage. Especially if you're playing on a two-hander, this gets amplified even more. But perfect masterworking in general, with your like chance for your skill to hit 2 times or do double damage, you're going from 75% chance to do, let's say, double damage to 100%. So that's like 25% of your damage right there. I know sometimes it doesn't always correlate to that, because there's certain effects that don't work on double effects, but for the most part, this is kind of true. Also, make sure that you're looking at the same amount of paragons that you have versus the other build. I know it takes a lot longer now to get to the paragon 300, but about 250 is where your build should kind of really feel like it's coming together. If like you're a 170 and the content creator is showing like a 230 paragon or 200 plus, sometimes a lot of those will start to add up, as well as getting your glyph ups. But perfect rolled aspects is a big thing. If you're losing, again, like 10x here on like 5 different slots, but then there's also, let's say, on the Barbarian, where you get 2 two-handers, where you could be losing out on, let's say, going from a 40x to a 60x, because again, the two-handers give you double the stats. This is a big multiplier. When you, again, use 2 different things, that's already 40x right there, and then 10, 20 on every single other area. This does add up to a huge amount. Also, the glyphs. This is actually kind of a big thing that a lot of people may not know about. Certain builds that tap out at, let's say, like pit 90, right? Some of their glyphs are still at glyph 100, or if they're showing you a pit clear, make sure that you have realistic expectations in terms of what their glyph level is. And this comes down to basically, sometimes certain builds are way better than other builds, right? Like, for example, like the Spiritborn could carry someone else through a pit 100, so then the other person that is barely doing pit 90 with, let's say, a mediocre build, their glyphs are still 100. That is a big separation, because you're still leveling up your glyphs, and you're like, well, if he can do like this amount of pit tiers, well, I gotta level up my glyphs to be on the same level, and sometimes again they are getting a carry, and that is how they are able to kind of progress, if that makes sense. And this is the most important note that I kind of want to end off the video with, is that high level of pit clear is not like you do it one time. So don't expect your build, if you see someone's build that's doing like a 130, do not expect to go in and be like, all right, I'm gonna go do a pit 130. I've got the same gear that he has. Even if you copy the build exactly, you have the best things. The thing is that most of the time people are playing like 30 hours a day and they get that one really good rift or that pit tier. I used to do a lot of grinding on Diablo 3 as well, and I've hit rank 1 multiple times, and I can tell you, most of the time, people don't just go in one time and like, all right, I'm getting the #1 rank clear. They do these again and again, not to just get that perfect rift, but then also sometimes the pylons matter quite a bit as well. There's the different types of monsters. Some of them give you more or less progression. There's a lot of things that go into it, and some of it is not necessarily skill, but what a lot of Diablo players will call it is fishing for the correct room. There is that like orange map. That one's sometimes considered one of the better ones. It depends on your build. Right now there is a pin shot Azeroth build where if there is a wall on the boss, you get way more DPS, because that is a huge thing for certain builds. There's map layouts. Sometimes right now for the pulverized Druid in particular, since we are talking about season 9 here, if you get a boss that does not have like flat terrain, their special overpower with the little poison puddle does not function properly, therefore it does fall apart. There's also a few different snapshots. There is still snapshotting in this game, and if you guys don't know what the snapshot is with certain things, one of them can be with like turning into werebear, werewolf. You get a bunch of these buffs and then you snapshot and you swap, and you basically can keep these buffs the whole time. This was a kind of a bigger fender when Cataclysm Druid was a very popular build as well. You need to learn how to do snapshotting. I do have a dedicated video that does go over this, but some of these tricks you have to learn where you can actually snapshot certain things in the game and how the mechanic works, and I won't go over it in this video because there's so many skills that interact differently, but there's also snapshotting to specific things like when your Cax rune is activated, and also when, let's say, that boss stagger bar builds up, there are certain windows, specifically with Diablo 3 with the Convention of Elements ring. That was like kind of a big thing for you to snapshot all your DPS in that specific window. But again, learning how to snapshot and when you need to do certain things in the game does kind of tie into more so skill than more so knowledge than skill, really. But I want to stress that do not worry too much about like you thinking that it is a skill issue. It is a lot of times when you look at these best builds. I really want to stress this, is that you're not going to go in and just do this because you have the same exact build, and more than likely, again, it is not going to be an enjoyable playstyle. It's just going to get you frustrated in the game. So hopefully this video guide was informative and you learned something new, and maybe you could still gain some extra power and knowledge with this video to kind of learn how some of these things kind of interact and maybe why your build isn't the same. Because I have sometimes people come in like, hey Slaydra, I copied your build from season 6, and this is currently season 9 right now. They're like, I'm unable to do this, and like, you know, I usually try to tell you guys if, you know, the build has been nerfed, like in my video over here, which was a pretty crazy one. This was a pit 150. It was pretty broken. There was also one recently this season with a sorceress where there's another broken build that could do a 150, but again, a lot of these things may get nerfed, and even the top tier builds, it's kind of interesting because the pit leaderboard over here, they removed all the like 150s, like they never really counted those for specifically the Sorc when they were doing 150s, but like, let's be real here, the Spiritborn is a bugged build with so many multiple bugs. That one is okay. So I really don't know how this is going to register on certain websites because there's no official leaderboard, but some builds, they are straight up bugged and they are accepted in the community. Some builds, they're bugged and they're like, well, we can't do that. That's a bugged build. You know, that slap on the wrist for that guy. He didn't do it legit. The reality is that's the current state of Diablo, but hopefully this video, again, helps some of you guys out and kind of alleviate the idea and mindset of, I gotta push for rank 1, I gotta copy the best build. Again, you're gonna have a lot more fun playing other builds, but that's gonna wrap up the video. If you guys enjoyed it, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn the bell if you want to see more Diablo and other gaming content in the future, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.